This episode is brought to you by our good friends over at Koitech. They empower engineering teams to build energy-efficient IoT and embedded devices. They provide state-of-the-art solutions for power consumption measurements and analysis and battery life prediction. Power profile your hardware and software and test and pick the right battery or energy harvesting for your application at your bench or in an automated setting, all with the one comprehensive, flexible, and scalable AUTI product suite. Join the leading players in the electronics industry in delivering long-lasting innovation with Koitech. Learn more at koitech.com. That's Koitech.com. Welcome, Frédéric, to the IoT For All Podcast. Thanks for being here this week.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. Excited to kind of have this conversation that I know we've been talking about for a while now. But before we do that, maybe you could give our audience a quick overview about yourself and the company to kind of catch them up.
So my official title at the Eclipse Foundation is Senior Manager Embedded and IoT. And essentially it means I do two things. The first one is to keep an eye on the 50 plus open source projects we have in the IoT, edge computing and embedded space. And the second half of that is working with a number of what we call working groups or industry collaborations. So grouping of our members that come together to work on specific things like, Eclipse IoT, that's self-describing. But we've got Sparkplug, we've got the ThreadX Alliance, we've got Open Hardware Foundation now that I also take care of. So it's a very diversified bunch.
So today's conversation, we wanted to kind of center it around the recent IoT and embedded survey report that you did. In the past, when we kind of dove into reports that organizations have gone through and produced, I think the best way to kick that off would be, at least at the start here, just maybe high level it for the audience. You know, what was the purpose of the report? Who was included in the report? And then we can kind of get into the findings and the fun stuff.
Well, essentially, to get what we are going with for the report, you need to understand how we work at the Eclipse Foundation. And essentially, the Eclipse Foundation is a nonprofit stewarding open source projects and open specifications. So everything that we do typically is transparent and in the open, done publicly and for the benefit of the broader open source ecosystem. So this particular survey is our annual IoT and Edge and Embedded Developer Survey. And essentially the goal there is to gather information about the state of the market and then share that as broadly as possible with people that can benefit from. So of course, in building the survey, we sit down with our members, and especially in this case, the members of our IoT and embedded initiatives, and ask them, okay, what do you need to know about the state of the market to help you make better decisions? Of course, we run the survey for a number of months, and after that, we publish the report, and every report that we publish is always under a Creative Commons license. So if people are curious and want to download it, the license essentially gives you the right to reproduce, remix, do whatever you want, as long as you give attribution to the foundation.
So let's go ahead and dive into some of the findings here. One of the things I want to start off jumping into is around the sectors that you all see are kind of leading the way in the space right now. And it seemed like from what I was reading, there are two main ones, but I'm sure there are many others that are kind of following those two leaders. So what does that outlook look like, and kind of just what can you tell us about those sectors that are leading the way?
Yeah, so this year, the leading sectors in the survey were industrial automation and automotive. Industrial automation, that's not really surprising given our audience, in the sense that what we do in Eclipse IoT particularly is really enterprise IoT. And this means, smart buildings, factories, and of course, we've got the Sparkplug protocol, which is used in industrial automation. So that's a crowd pretty big on enterprise type of projects. Automotive was a bit more surprising to me. Not that automotive is not important at Eclipse. We've got a full-blown software-defined vehicle working group with over 40 members. So, we are pretty active in that sector. But it was interesting to see for the first year that we were seeing cross-pollination between those two. More automotive people probably came to our survey. But when you think about it, I like to tease my SDV colleagues with that. But, the connected car is really the ultimate IoT use case, right? It's full of sensors and all of that. You would pretend they are very original and separate, but it's just a special and interesting, of course, application.
We've noticed kind of a similar trend as well, with the automotive and industrial really being two primary areas for new solutions being developed. In the survey itself, or through your conversations, did you also look at which types of use cases were popular and leading the way in those two industries, or was that not something you all focused on?
No, use cases are also something that we consider. And of course, it's always tricky. You put together a number of choices and you try to capture all possible interesting angles. But really, what we've seen this year is really a rising focus on sustainability and lifestyle solutions. And the lifestyle that goes hand in hand with the car in one way, but there's also healthcare, for example, which is a very important dimension. Fitness trackers and other things that complement that are really important for people. On the other hand, we've also seen energy management and environmental applications occupy lots of space. And in that case, for energy management, given the growing importance of electric vehicles, it's not surprising. I mean, I installed a charger myself. I bought an EV earlier this year, and suddenly I needed to know, what's the peak consumption of my home in order to figure out the wiring and everything. It's true for me, then it's true for tons of people in the space. And for organizations as well, because more and more you see the electrification of delivery fleet and things like that. In terms of environmental, well, of course, monitoring air quality, water quality, and all of that is something that we have in common, not only in developed countries or in developed economies, generally speaking. This is something that can tremendously help upcoming economies, those countries where they don't necessarily have the full-blown wired infrastructure that we've been developing for the last 50 or 60 years or even longer. But at the same time, monitoring those things help with agriculture and help the quality of life, even in places where they don't have a full-blown infrastructure in cities like we have, for example. So for me, it's not surprising to see that kind of use case growing in interest for IoT developers.
Yeah, that was going to kind of be a follow-up with this shift that seems to be more towards IoT solutions that prioritize sustainability, efficiency, improved quality of life. Is there what do you think is really pushing and driving that shift this past year?
To me, it's really the fact that essentially an IoT device is an everyday device. It's software embedded in our daily lives, literally all around us. And just considering a typical smartphone, we see it as one computer with one touchscreen in a way, but it's full of small microcontrollers and subsystems in there that do various things. And of course, there's tons of sensors in them. But that's a very personal, a very day-to-day object that we use on a daily basis. So as we see, the growing availability of smart lighting, for example, for our homes, easy to deploy sensors that help us monitor the environment, and of course, actuators that enable integration with the real world doing, automating things for us. I think that the fact that those things are improving our daily lives is really the driving factor there.
Or I guess any time we bring up kind of the embedded space, bring up hardware, bring up just, I guess, any solution in general, security is also a pretty big topic that people like to talk about. And for us, we've kind of analyzed it over the years and just kind of monitored the trends and what's going on. So in terms of kind of security priorities that companies are seeing or that you're just seeing generally in the IoT space, what findings did you all have come out of the report that's associated with the key security priorities that are going on right now?
Yeah, the top one was communication security, or in other words, encryption in motion, so to speak. Of course, there are mature solutions there. TLS has been there forever and SSL before that. But it goes further than that, because of course, the rise in quantum computing we need to think about post-quantum cryptography and things like that. So for developers, that's really top of mind, because if you cannot ensure privacy for the data in motion, then the whole interest in IoT will vanish. We don't want our personal lives be exposed, anywhere on the internet. Then, of course, with that come over-the-air updates as a topic of interest. And naturally, this comes with the growing commitment of device makers to keep their devices secure, of course. there's still progress to be made. You will still find cheap devices from shady places that won't ever be updated and are full of security holes. So you need to be careful. But especially in Europe, and we, the Eclipse Foundation, are the largest open source organization in Europe. So we are particularly sensitive to this. But, legislation like the Cyber Resilience Act means that in a few years, device makers will be held to a higher standard. So for us, this focus on over-the-air updates shows that people are getting serious about maintaining devices over the long haul. And of course, with that come things like secure boot and device attestation and things like that, in the sense that it's one thing to buy a device which has been patched and is secure, but it needs to stay that way. It's all live, even if it could be stolen in the real world and someone tries to hack with it. So secure boot is an integral component for that. And of course, device attestation, where essentially you use a chain of certificates to ensure that everything in the device has been not compromised.
No, it totally makes sense. I think also when you compare the consumer versus the enterprise space, the security concerns sometimes vary depending on who you're talking to, and obviously the use case, the application, the environment, all that kind of good stuff. I mean, we've had conversations with people talking about all the different devices that are available on Amazon for any type of consumer purchase, and just how the average person has no idea how to protect themselves, has no idea what they're looking for in selecting a device, and most of those devices are potentially have areas of risk that just the average person would not be aware of. So as more devices get created and more connected solutions are out there, the education piece becomes even more important for especially the sellers of these devices, the creators of these devices, so that the average person can make an informed decision.
Yes, you're completely right on that. And that's why I don't have a smart home. I have the skills to build it, but I don't have the time. And I cannot trust whatever I see for purchase or for subscription in my environment. So I don't.
I know, I get it. It's kind of like that. There's kind of two sides to it, right? Is you want to have those benefits of smart home devices, but at the same time, if you really understand it, like anybody in the IoT space does, you unfortunately also understand the risks. And it's sometimes maybe being kind of sheltered or naive to it. It's maybe it's easier to create adoption in that case, but for us, knowing that every device we put in our home, there's a chance that somebody could hack into it, or it's another access point. And if we don't know the origins of the device, there's risks there. It's just kind of piles up on top of each other, doesn't it? So let me ask you, as we kind of talk about security concerns, priorities that people have, are there, outside of the security side of things, are there other concerns that you kind of were able to derive from this survey report that people are having, or that's maybe a trend that's worth noting for just the kind of industry as a whole?
Well, it's not necessarily a new trend, but really what we see in our open source ecosystem is a growing interest in safety critical systems for embedded devices, and specifically safety certifications, because for several industries, you need to undergo official certification with third-party auditors in order to get your device on the market. So Eclipse Foundation was not in that market segment before, but we entered it last November when Microsoft gave us Azure RTOS, and in the process, it gave birth to the Eclipse ThreadX project. So ThreadX was the name of that commercial real-time operating system in the past. Microsoft renamed it, and then we took the old name back when we started an open source project with Microsoft's contribution. And really nearly half of the respondents in our survey told us that specific international standards, like, for example, ISO 26262 for automotive, or IEC 61508, which is more about electronic devices in general, are really relevant to them for sectors like automotive, medical devices, industrial automation. So for us, it's really interesting because it's not the same time of developer, it's not the same time of mindset when you talk to embedded developers building safety critical applications versus run-of-the-mill IoT developers, so to speak.
So it does make it seem like there is growing demand for those safety critical solutions, and industry is really focusing on having trusted, certified technologies in their system. For those of the listeners that may not be as familiar with safety certifications, can you just high level kind of what those are and why they're important?
So typically, of course, there can be exceptions, but typically you will always have a standards definition organization like the International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC, or the International Standardization Organization, ISO, putting together big standards that are really, really thick and complicated. But those standards essentially are there to safeguard, our lives. If I oversimplify things, they define things in a way where there are specific measurable criteria for products that would conform to those standards. And in turn, then, there's a whole set of techniques that you put to work or that you leverage in order to validate products that are supposed to conform with those standards. And we could talk for hours and hours about the topic. I'm a newbie in that area myself, in the sense I started reading and get familiar with that when I inherited Eclipse ThreadX essentially as a project. But really the point there is that you need to define, the conditions where the system is safe. And the system is a car, the system can be the ventilation inside a plane, so there are various layers there. But really you define the conditions where it's safe and how it should behave if somehow conditions become unsafe. So for example, if you would take a software-defined vehicle, the safest condition for a car is to be immobile. So that's why if in many of those cars, there are cameras watching the driver. And if you lose consciousness, the car, after a while, if it cannot wake you up with vibrations or sounds or things like that, will slowly, change lanes, get on the side of the road and wait there. And in some cases, call an ambulance for you or something. This illustrates the importance of this safe state, let's say, in the design of those solutions. So essentially, the tests that you do for conformance to those standards mean that the behavior of the system is very predictable when it runs properly. And then you define the safe states if something happened and you need to take special action to preserve the life or avoid injury for the user.
Kind of pivot a little bit here towards something that we haven't covered a ton about. We covered actually a lot during our early days, but not in recent kind of conversations, is around the kind of the design element of applications. So the end user app design. So like the actual interface, the engagement that the end user is using. What did you all learn in your work, or I guess in the report, that around any trends related to that?
What we've seen in the participant sensors is that there's a growing acknowledgement that involving end user in the design is really fundamental in IoT solutions. And we have a tendency as engineers, we have those little boards that we play with all the time. And, it's exciting to plug sensors on that and build really quick and dirty user interfaces just to test. But sometimes that's the thing. In those projects, we have a tendency to cut corners in a way that, essentially what was just a quick and dirty user interface became the shipping product, right? Because designers are expensive, and of course, usability, A/B testing, and things like that is also expensive and time-consuming as well. What is really great in the survey is that there is this acknowledgement that you need to think a bit more about those aspects, and maybe a set of flashing LED patterns to signal the state of the system is not enough anymore. So the cost of small screens, for example, that would give you a textual message is getting down because the industry is slowly expanding and more devices are made, which means that we can provide modalities of interaction that are a bit more explicit about what is going wrong about the device or what is the status of the device and things like that. And of course, another big factor there is smartphone integration, in the sense that the combination of a smart device with, let's say, Bluetooth or Zigbee connectivity is a powerful thing in itself that enables more complete interaction patterns to be implemented in a solution.
Building a solution, obviously we know that with IoT, there's so many different pieces from a technology perspective, but really trying to think from the end user backwards and was really what's going to kind of lead you to the highest chance of success when that actually gets deployed. Obviously, you need all the right technology involved to make it make sense and make it work. But if the end user can't use it and it's not efficient for them or valuable for them, then there's no value there for the solution as a whole. So that's always been something that we've praised companies who really focus on that. We think it's a really good attribute for sure.
Yes, and this highlights how personal those technologies are at the same time, right? They are daily objects. So I wouldn't want to have to read a manual to use my alarm clock or my fitness tracker. And sometimes we need to, because those are implemented in way too complex ways.
So as we wrap up here, I have a few more just quick questions I want to hit you with. One around industrial IoT protocol trends. So I know it's all in there that's showing growth with MQTT and other emerging technologies. Is anything to kind of add on to that as far as, what are the communication protocols that are leading the way there?
Yes, MQTT is our consistent leader year after year, so it's not big surprise. But when you look at the rest of the data, it's interesting to see the growth of some alternatives. For example, we've got a very popular project at the Eclipse Foundation, which is called Eclipse Zeno. And Zeno is a PubSub protocol like MQTT. But the thing is, it can work in peer-to-peer mode. So you don't need a central point of failure, let's say like a broker would be in an MQTT setup. Or it can work in routed mode, where essentially you have routing nodes in the local environment that can form complex topologies according to whatever your use case needs. So that particular project has seen significant growth. And if you like MQTT, but let's say, well, one of the great things about MQTT is that you can publish anything anywhere. And one of the bad things about MQTT is that you can publish anything anywhere. So out of the box, MQTT infrastructure is not necessarily interoperable, right? And you buy a device and you have software speaking MQTT on the other side, and now you need to figure out the payloads and all of that. So we've got a very healthy project at the Eclipse Foundation that's called Sparkplug. Sparkplug uses MQTT as a transport, but is a higher level protocol defining standard payload and a predictable topic structure, plus stateful session management for the device. So essentially, you don't need to poll them to know if they are online. And the survey showed that Sparkplug experienced growth again last year, and especially since Sparkplug, and we are very proud of that, in 2023 became an ISO IEC standard. So it's ISO IEC 20237. Yes.
Impressive. Last two things I want to ask you before I let you go here is on the open source side of things. How important did you all find in the report that open source is? I'd just be curious to kind of hear what you learned on that front.
The trend there is clear because I don't remember the exact figure there. Maybe it's 70, maybe it's 75%, but in any case, yes, 75, I think. The vast majority of the respondents told us that open source technologies are really important to them, right? And of course, this matches this assertion made a few years ago at the Linux Foundation, saying that maybe 80 to 90% of all the software in the world is in truth open source. Even if you take Mac OS or whatever proprietary technology you would find in the market, if you look under the hood, there are tons of open source dependencies. So this is true of IoT as well. But we are at this inflection point where open source is not limited to software only. It's also entering the world of hardware. And of course, there's been open PCB designs or open circuit designs available in the wild for a while. But, if we go back 10 or I think it was 2014. So 10 years or 12 years ago, we've seen the rise of the RISC-V instruction set, which is inherently open source. So this gives birth to something different on the chip side of things, so to speak. But then in 2019, what we started with a kind of sister organization, which is now becoming something else with us. But anyway, Open Hardware Group, now the Open Hardware Foundation at the Eclipse Foundation, is really focused on open source core and microcontroller designs, which means you go on GitHub and you have in a chip-specific language the source code, so to speak, for microprocessors or for microcontrollers there. And this is a game changer because in the past, if you wanted to ensure that your specific microcontroller would be available for the full life cycle of a product, you needed to negotiate with your supplier. Well, not anymore, because you can pick up those open designs and really go to a foundry, make chips out of that, and use them for however long you need them, and even customize them, which once again was reserved to high-end chip designers and things like that. So open source is now permeating the world of software, but it's now entering the world of hardware design as well. And we are proud at the Eclipse Foundation to be at the junction of those two really exciting trends.
Anything we didn't cover that's worth mentioning? I know there was some talk in there about developer demographics, which was interesting. There was some stuff about the regional kind of growth just around the different areas of the world. Anything that, just kind of sits top of mind for you that you were really interested in learning about that we could share to wrap up here?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of demographics for the survey, generally speaking, the trends in the last few years have been fairly stable in the sense that we have very strong engagement from people in the APAC, Asia Pacific area, and of course in Europe, which shows where we are stronger geographically speaking. So my aim for next year's survey would really to ensure we get a stronger contingent of US and Canada-based people, just to make sure that we cover all angles and that we truly reflect the state of the market. In terms of the type of developers who participated, we had at least 30% or close to 30% of people who answered the survey. We had 10 years of experience or more. And certainly my goal is to grow the number of newbies, so to speak, IoT or edge computing newbies or embedded newbies to the survey, because it seems we had a smaller share this year of less experienced developers. So for me, that will be an important goal. As for the rest, really, what I hope to learn next year is certainly how strong the incentive for coming from legislation like the Cyber Resilience Act will be for device makers on making their devices easier to use, better documented from an end user perspective, and of course, better supported for the long haul, because once again, the legislation in a few years will impose dates. So how fast will people scramble to get ready ahead of time or not? For me, that will be fascinating because, we see this transition right now where software and IoT in general was largely unregulated. And now, because of safety certifications, because of the requirements of the CRA in Europe, we increasingly operate in an environment where regulations will determine what we need to do as developers. So that's a big transition. And we'll, of course, monitor the progress of the industry closely next year.
I appreciate you taking the time to kind of share these insights with our audience. Where can they find more about the report, download it, read it themselves, or just dive in to learn more about the kind of the Eclipse Foundation, everything that you have going on there, or follow up with any questions?
So in that case, the easiest place to go is the website for the Eclipse IoT Working Group. So iot.eclipse.org. The survey report is available there for free, so you can download your own copy. If you want to learn, of course, about the foundation as a whole, we've got eclipse.org as the go-to place for that. And you can reach me at iot@eclipse.org if you want to learn more or if you want to learn about the great projects that we've got. And that includes, of course, ThreadX and open hardware and everything else that I mentioned in our conversation.
Frédéric, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm excited to get this out to our audience. We'll probably get it out, I think, within the next few days, if not next week. And other than that, thank you for your time. And we'd love to have you back when, if you do any more reports or any other kind of things that we're sharing with the audience.
Well, thank you so much. And then since it will be available so fast, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, whatever floats your boat. But anyway, I hope you enjoy the time off and a great 2025 to everyone.